have a very big announcement today that has to do with nuclear energy.
For weeks now, we've been faced with so much uncertainty coming from President Trump. I will not hesitate to shut the electricity off completely.
Ontario wants to cut power to over 1.5 million American homes, and no one's talking about it. Right now, the electricity keeping your lights on could be flowing straight from Canada, controlled by a province that's quietly seizing unprecedented power over America's energy grid. For years, Canada quietly kept America's lights on. Now, on top of Ontario powering over 1 million U.S. homes, they control 20% of the uranium-fueling U.S. nuclear plants. This isn't just trade, it's leverage. And now that power is being used. But why is Ontario suddenly weaponizing electricity exports against American? How did a Canadian province become the leader in next-generation nuclear technology that U.S. utilities now desperately need? What happens when your energy security depends on decisions made in a foreign capital? And which states will be left in the dark? Stick around to find out. Cross-border currents. How does a single Canadian province gain leverage over the world's largest economy? 1 kilowatt at a time. In Plattsburgh, New York, a city of 19,000 residents just 20 miles from the Canadian border, the impact of Ontario's electricity tariff manifested immediately. The local utility faced an additional $800,000 in monthly costs. We never imagined Ontario would weaponize electricity, explains Richard Thornton, Plattsburgh's utility director. Our entire rate structure was built on the assumption that Canadian power would remain stable and affordable. For small businesses like Adirondack Coffee Roasters, the increased electricity costs threatened already thin margins. Owner Samantha Weiss saw her monthly utility bill jump nearly 20% overnight. This isn't just eating into profits. It's forcing us to consider price increases during an already difficult economic period. The human dimension extends to workers maintaining the physical infrastructure. Line technician James Cooper has spent 22 years maintaining transmission infrastructure at the international boundary. There's no American side or Canadian side to the grid. Electricity doesn't recognize international boundaries. This integration shapes communities. Border towns throughout the region have developed around the energy infrastructure, with generations of families working in positions supporting the power exchange. In Cornwall, Ontario, nearly 1 in 5 jobs connects to the electricity export industry. Ontario's grid operators feel the weight of this responsibility. Control Room Supervisor Anita Williams monitors the flow of electricity across international interconnection points. When Premier Ford announced the tariff, our first concern was maintaining system stability. The dependence runs deeper than many Americans realize. During summer heat waves, when air conditioning drives demand to critical levels, Ontario's nuclear capacity often provides the margin preventing brownouts in New York City. This reliability stems from Ontario's unique energy profile, a province generating 50% of its electricity from nuclear power. Meanwhile, in the uranium mines of Saskatchewan, workers extracted the very foundation of this cross-border power relationship. Resource realities: 20% of America's nuclear fuel comes from Canadian soil, creating a dependency few Americans realize exists. Deep beneath the boreal forests of northern Saskatchewan, massive uranium deposits form the foundation of North America's nuclear industry. Canada holds the world's 4th largest uranium reserves, positioning it as a critical supplier for American nuclear facilities. The uranium supply chain represents a vulnerability that energy security experts have long recognized, but politicians rarely discuss, explains nuclear policy analyst David Chen. While the United States maintains significant military uranium reserves, its civilian nuclear fleet depends heavily on imported fuel. This dependency manifests in concrete numbers. American nuclear plants consume approximately 18,000 tons of uranium annually. With Canadian uranium accounting for roughly 20% of that total, Any disruption to the supply would severely impact America's baseload power generation. The commercial relationship surrounding uranium has developed sophisticated mechanisms for managing this interdependency. Long-term contracts typically govern uranium purchases, with durations often extending 5 to 10 years. These agreements provide stability, but also create rigidity. Neither partner can easily disengage. Saskatchewan's Cigar Lake mine exemplifies this critical resource link. Producing over 18 million pounds of uranium annually, this single facility influences American energy security more than most policymakers acknowledge. We're extracting the material that keeps American cities powered, explained senior mining engineer Elizabeth Marshall. That's when the real imbalance emerged. While Canada controlled the uranium, America monopolized the technology to enrich it. Balance of power. The lights staying on in New York during summer heat waves. That's Ontario's decision now. The relationship between Ontario and the United States exemplifies a new kind of international leverage, one built not on military might or economic dominance, but on energy interdependence. This balance has evolved over decades, transforming from a simple commercial arrangement into a complex web of mutual vulnerability. What we've created isn't just an electricity market, it's a physical manifestation of international relations, explains Dr. Elena Rodriguez, professor of energy geopolitics. The transmission lines crossing the border at Niagara Falls carry more than electricity. They carry leverage, dependency, and vulnerability. This relationship remained largely uncontroversial until 2023. During trade negotiations concerning Canadian aluminum and American agricultural products, Premier Ford made an unprecedented suggestion. Energy exports could become a bargaining chip. This marked the first time a Canadian provincial leader explicitly framed electricity as a strategic resource, rather than a simple commodity. The power dynamic becomes particularly visible during critical moments. When New York City faced potential brownouts during the July 2024 heatwave, Ontario Power Generation ramped up exports by nearly 40%, preventing service interruptions affecting millions. What makes this relationship distinct is its bidirectionality. While American communities depend on Ontario's electricity, Ontario's grid occasionally requires American backup during winter demand spikes. This creates a more nuanced power balance than simple supplier-consumer dynamics. Climate considerations add another layer. Ontario's electricity, primarily from nuclear and hydroelectric sources, carries a significantly lower carbon footprint than comparable American generation. As climate commitments intensify, Ontario's clean electricity becomes increasingly valuable to American states facing decarbonization mandates. With Premier Ford's declaration that he could turn off the switch during trade disputes, every nuclear plant operator in the northeastern United States suddenly faced an uncomfortable question. Just how vulnerable were they? We've analyzed classified energy reports and interviewed nuclear insiders to uncover Ontario's control mechanisms. You now understand vulnerabilities the government won't acknowledge. Subscribe to protect your energy future, splitting the atom, sharing the power. The fourth largest uranium reserves in the world sit under Canadian soil. Yet America controls whether that uranium powers a single light bulb. This paradox defines the nuclear relationship between Ontario and the United States, a complex dance of resource wealth and technological capability. The yellowcake uranium extracted from Saskatchewan's mines holds tremendous potential energy, but remains inert until processed through enrichment facilities that Canada simply doesn't possess. Enrichment represents the critical choke point in the nuclear fuel cycle, explains nuclear engineer Dr. Priya Sharma. It requires billion-dollar facilities with highly specialized technology that very few nations control. The United States maintains this technological leverage through companies like Centrus Energy in Ohio. This enrichment capability provides America with a counterbalance to Canada's resource advantage, creating what energy economists call complementary dependency. Neither side can fully operate without the other. The numbers tell a compelling story. The United States controls approximately 30% of global enrichment capacity, while Canada controls 0. This technology gap forces Canadian nuclear operators to ship their uranium south for processing, then re-import the enriched fuel at significantly higher cost. For Ontario's nuclear plants, which provide 50% of the province's electricity, this dependency creates vulnerability. Plant operators typically maintain 18 to 24-month fuel reserves, precisely to buffer against such disruptions. Meanwhile, in the boardrooms of Centrus Energy and other American enrichment companies, executives had been watching Ontario's nuclear ambitions with growing interest. When the lights went out, that blackout you remember from 2003, it revealed the hidden vulnerability of the grid connecting Ontario to 8 American states. On August 14, 2003, a software bug in a control room in Ohio triggered the largest blackout in North American history. Within hours, 50 million people across Ontario and the northeastern United States lost power. Subway trains stopped between stations in New York City. Hospital generators strained under emergency load in Toronto. I was working the control room that day, recalls retired grid operator Samuel Lynn. One moment we were managing normal flow between Ontario and New York. The next, cascading failures were rolling across the interconnection points faster than human operators could respond. For Linda Cardoza, then a nurse at Buffalo General Hospital, the blackout revealed healthcare's dependency on reliable electricity. We had critical patients on ventilators, suddenly depending on backup generators. When those generators began overheating after 12 hours, we realized just how intertwined our lives are with stable power from both sides of the border. The event exposed not just technical vulnerabilities, but governance challenges. The grid spanning the border operated under fragmented oversight. American regulation stopped at the boundary, Canadian jurisdiction began there, and the interconnection points existed in a regulatory gray zone. In the aftermath, both nations established the Joint United States-Canada Task Force on the power outage. Their final report contained 46 recommendations, many addressing the special challenges of cross-border power management. What the blackout taught us, explains grid resilience expert Dr. James Wilson, was that electricity follows the laws of physics, not the laws of nations. When these grids connected decades ago, both countries accepted an interdependence that can't be easily unwound. The investigation revealed something unexpected. Neither country could truly control its energy destiny without the other's cooperation. The enrichment gap. What happens when a nuclear power lacks the ability to process its own fuel? It creates an entirely new kind of diplomacy. Canada stands among the elite club of nations with mature nuclear energy programs. Its CANDU reactor design operates not just domestically but in Argentina, China, India, Pakistan, Romania, and South Korea. Yet despite this technological sophistication, Canada remains dependent on foreign enrichment services, primarily from the United States. This enrichment gap represents Canada's Achilles heel in nuclear self-sufficiency, explains energy policy researcher Emma Lockhart. They've mastered reactor design, operation, and waste management, but still must send their uranium abroad for the critical middle step in the fuel cycle. This dependency isn't accidental. The United States and other nuclear weapons states have historically restricted enrichment technology through both formal international agreements and informal pressure. These restrictions, designed to prevent weapons proliferation, have effectively created an enrichment cartel. For Ontario's nuclear ambitions, this gap creates practical complications. Shipping uranium to American enrichment facilities adds approximately 7% to fuel costs through transportation and customs processes alone. The true significance of this dependency becomes apparent during periods of trade tension. When broader disputes arise between the United States and Canada, the enrichment relationship creates asymmetric leverage. American officials can threaten fuel processing restrictions, while Canadian officials have fewer immediate countermeasures. This reality has prompted growing discussions within Canada about developing domestic enrichment capability. In 2023, a parliamentary committee conducted feasibility studies for establishing small-scale enrichment facilities. As tensions rose between the trading partners, the uranium flowing south and the enrichment technology flowing north became pawns in a much larger economic chess match. The resource paradox. Your nuclear future isn't determined by who has the most uranium, but by who controls the most critical points in the supply chain. The energy relationship between Ontario and the United States exemplifies a modern resource paradox. Raw materials no longer guarantee leverage in a world dominated by technological choke points. Despite Canada's vast uranium resources, the enrichment capabilities concentrated in American hands create asymmetric influence. We're witnessing the evolution of resource politics, explains international trade expert Dr. Naomi Parker. Throughout the 20th century, physical control of commodities translated directly to geopolitical power. Today, technological processing capacity often matters more than the resource itself. This dynamic manifests throughout the nuclear fuel cycle. Saskatchewan's uranium mines produce approximately 13% of global supply, an impressive figure that suggests significant leverage. Yet America's enrichment capacity represents a far more consequential control point. Historical parallels demonstrate this pattern across industries. Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves provided tremendous influence during the 1970s energy crisis. However, as refining technology advanced, crude oil producers saw their leverage diminish relative to those controlling processing infrastructure. For Ontario's nuclear operators, this reality creates strategic calculations that extend beyond simple economics. Maintaining substantial fuel reserves becomes not just operational prudence, but diplomatic insurance against supply chain disruptions. Resource relationships always involve power dynamics, notes economic historian Robert Chen. What makes the Ontario-America nuclear relationship unique is the mutual vulnerability it creates. Neither side can easily escape the other without significant cost and disruption. The future may bring shifts to this delicate balance. Emerging technologies like laser enrichment promise to dramatically reduce the capital cost of building enrichment facilities, potentially allowing middle powers like Canada to develop domestic capabilities. As these resource questions played out in diplomatic channels, engineers in Ontario were breaking ground on something that would forever alter the balance of nuclear influence: the Darlington Difference. The future of American nuclear power is being built quietly and methodically on Canadian soil. Along Lake Ontario's northern shore, a historic transformation is underway at the Darlington site. Here, construction crews are assembling North America's first commercial small modular reactor, the BWRX-300, in a project worth over $20 billion. But this is more than a power plant. It's a strategic play. What we're building here isn't just a reactor, says Project Director Sophia Williams. It's a prototype for a new energy paradigm. The design is modular, scalable, and far quicker to deploy than traditional nuclear facilities. It's a nuclear renaissance, starting in Ontario. Ontario Power Generation has invested over $20.9 billion into the Darlington SMR, with 80% of procurement feeding into local firms. The result? Not just energy, but a self-sustaining industrial ecosystem that American utilities will soon depend on. While 27 U.S. utilities have expressed interest in similar SMRs, none have broken ground. Ontario's head start has granted it immense influence. From standards and supply chains to operational protocols, Canada is setting the pace. Industrial strategist Michael Torres puts it bluntly: Ontario is creating dependencies that American projects will struggle to escape. What's being decided today isn't just about one plant. It's about who leads the nuclear industry in North America for the next 50 years. Because the nation that builds first defines the rules the rest must follow. And those rules aren't just forged in boardrooms. They're engineered in labs, factories, and control rooms across Ontario. That brings us to the people behind the project, the quiet revolutionaries building the future of North American energy, the engineers changing everything. 10 years from now, the clean energy powering your home could trace back to a single office in Ontario. There, reactor engineer Amira Patel pores over calculations for the Darlington SMR, knowing full well the ripple effect her work will have. "We're aware of our responsibility," she says. "What we build here sets the benchmark for all North American SMRs." This project isn't just technical, it's deeply human. Behind every regulatory filing and press release lies a workforce reshaping the future. Thousands of engineers, welders, and technicians are inventing the standards that American utilities may soon adopt. For welding specialist Juan Rodriguez, the shift to SMRs marks an inflection point. It's a different craft, new materials, tighter tolerances. "What I'm learning here will travel south whether I do or not." Darlington's surrounding communities have transformed in tandem. Technical colleges offer specialized SMR programs. Housing developments have surged. Local businesses thrive in the economic microclimate the project has created. Economic Development Director Teresa Liu calls it an industrial commons, a rich concentration of knowledge, suppliers, and skilled labor that cannot be easily replicated. This, she argues, might be Darlington's true legacy, not the reactor, but the workforce and ecosystem that sustain it. For residents like David Miller, watching from his Clarington lakefront home, the stakes go beyond economics. "We accepted the disruption because we believed in leading this transition. It matters that Ontario is writing the rulebook, not some faceless American conglomerate." As milestones fall and blueprints become reality, American utilities are watching. They face a stark choice: rebuild this expertise from scratch, or align with Ontario's leadership. Either way, the nuclear center of gravity is shifting north. And the next chapter in this story goes far beyond borders. We've decoded complex international financing documents revealing how Canada weaponized green bonds against American energy security. You now grasp a trillion-dollar market manipulation few recognize. Subscribe for more financial intelligence your leaders won't provide. The tariff effect. In one legislative session, Ontario transformed from energy partner to energy adversary, weaponizing electricity in a growing trade war. When Premier Ford announced the 25% electricity export tariff in early 2025, few anticipated how thoroughly it would reshape the energy relationship between Ontario and the United States. Within weeks, the economic ripples had transformed into political waves that demanded federal attention in Washington. The tariff wasn't just about revenue, explains political analyst Rebecca Chen. It demonstrated Ontario's willingness to use energy as leverage in broader trade disputes. That changes the calculation on everything from agricultural policy to manufacturing regulations. The economic impact materialized with startling speed. American utilities facing additional costs of approximately $200 million annually had limited options: absorb the expenses and reduce profits, pass costs to consumers through rate increases, or seek federal subsidies to offset the Canadian tariff. Most chose a combination of approaches, resulting in an average 6% rate increase for consumers in affected regions and emergency regulatory filings seeking temporary relief from environmental compliance costs to offset the new financial pressure. This is precisely how energy leverage functions in practice, notes trade economist Martin Santos. The pain isn't necessarily catastrophic, but it's substantial enough and targeted enough to create focused political pressure from the affected communities. The diplomatic response revealed the seriousness with which American officials viewed this development. Within days, the State Department elevated energy security in ongoing trade negotiations, while the Department of Energy established a task force to assess vulnerability to Canadian electricity disruptions. With Premier Ford threatening to double the tariff if American trade actions continued, border states faced an unprecedented energy security question: the tariff effect. In one legislative session, Ontario transformed from energy partner to energy adversary, weaponizing electricity in a growing trade war. When Premier Ford announced the 25% electricity export tariff in early 2025, few anticipated how thoroughly it would reshape the energy relationship between Ontario and the United States. Within weeks, the economic ripples had transformed into political waves that demanded federal attention in Washington. The tariff wasn't just about revenue, explains political analyst Rebecca Chen. It demonstrated Ontario's willingness to use energy as leverage in broader trade disputes. That changes the calculation on everything from agricultural policy to manufacturing regulations. The economic impact materialized with startling speed. American utilities facing additional costs of approximately $200 million annually had limited options: absorb the expenses and reduce profits, pass costs to consumers through rate increases, or seek federal subsidies to offset the Canadian tariff. Most chose a combination of approaches, resulting in an average 6% rate increase for consumers in affected regions and emergency regulatory filings seeking temporary relief from environmental compliance costs to offset the new financial pressure. This is precisely how energy leverage functions in practice, notes trade economist Martin Santos. The pain isn't necessarily catastrophic, but it's substantial enough and targeted enough to create focused political pressure from the affected communities. The diplomatic response revealed the seriousness with which American officials viewed this development. Within days, the State Department elevated energy security in ongoing trade negotiations, while the Department of Energy established a task force to assess vulnerability to Canadian electricity disruptions. With Premier Ford threatening to double the tariff if American trade actions continued, border states faced an unprecedented energy security question: the green bond revolution. What happens when Canada embraces nuclear as green energy, while America hesitates? A financing revolution that reshapes the industry. In 2024, Canada made a decision with far-reaching implications. It classified nuclear energy as officially green for purposes of sustainable finance. This seemingly technical designation created immediate advantages for Ontario's nuclear development, while placing American projects at a significant disadvantage. Green bond designation changed everything, explains finance specialist Emily Rodriguez. Ontario Power Generation suddenly gained access to over $4 trillion in global sustainable investment funds that explicitly excluded American nuclear projects. The financial consequences manifested immediately. Ontario's nuclear initiative secured financing at interest rates approximately 1.2 percentage points lower than comparable American projects. This difference applied across multi-billion-dollar developments, translated to hundreds of millions in reduced costs. More significantly, the green designation allowed Ontario to attract European and Asian institutional investors with specific sustainability mandates. These investors, managing pension funds and sovereign wealth portfolios worth trillions, increasingly shifted nuclear investments toward Canadian rather than American projects. The financing advantage creates a virtuous cycle, notes investment banker David Chen. Lower capital costs enable more competitive electricity pricing, which drives market share, which attracts further investment. American nuclear faces the opposite dynamic. For American nuclear developers, this created pressure to persuade their own regulators to match Canada's classification. Yet domestic environmental politics made this challenging, creating a persistent financing disadvantage relative to their northern neighbor. The numbers revealed something unexpected. Ontario's financing innovation was attracting American investment dollars that might otherwise have stayed home. The nuclear century, the energy powering North America's carbon-neutral future, isn't being designed in isolation. It's emerging from a complex dance of cooperation and competition. The relationship between Ontario and the United States demonstrates how thoroughly energy transitions have transformed international relations. Old models of competition and cooperation strain to capture arrangements where adversaries must collaborate and partners inevitably compete. We're developing new diplomatic paradigms for the climate age, explains international relations expert Dr. James Wilson. Energy transitions create dependencies and leverage points unlike anything in previous eras, requiring more sophisticated approaches to managing international relationships. The Ontario-American nuclear relationship embodies these contradictions. The two sides compete fiercely for leadership in SMR technology, while remaining deeply dependent on each other's uranium resources and enrichment capabilities. They battle over electricity tariffs while collaborating on grid stability and security protocols. For citizens on both sides, this complex relationship determines not just energy prices but climate futures. North America's ability to decarbonize rapidly enough to meet climate targets depends significantly on how effectively Ontario and the United States navigate their nuclear relationship. The stakes extend beyond environmental goals to questions of regional influence. As smaller nations throughout the Americas develop their own energy transitions, the Ontario-American relationship will substantially determine which nuclear technologies, standards, and financing models they adopt. Energy transitions always reorganize power relationships, notes historian Maria Lopez. The steam engine, the oil tanker, the natural gas pipeline, each created new geopolitical realities. The SMR represents a similar inflection point in determining who shapes the low-carbon future. For everyday citizens, this high-stakes relationship remains largely invisible until disruptions occur. Few Americans recognize that their climate goals, electricity bills, and even national security partially depend on decisions made in Ontario's provincial legislature or at reactor construction sites along Lake Ontario's shore. As climate deadlines loom and energy security concerns intensify, the relationship between these nuclear neighbors will determine not just who powers whom, but whether an entire continent can meet its climate goals in time. Will America reclaim its energy destiny from Ontario's grip? Comment your electricity bill increases below. Subscribe now for our next investigation. Thank you for joining the fight for energy sovereignty.